Please welcome Matt back to S4 and the ICS security world.
Really good to be back at S4, although this is a completely different venue than the one I went to in 2007. And the community itself, I believe, has changed quite a lot. Last night, I had the good fortune to meet some old friends and colleagues that, from the ICS world dating back 10 or 15 years. So it's really kind of a memory lane, and this talk that Dale asked me to put together over the summer is also sort of a reflection of how I left the ICS world and what I've been working on since then in this era of the cloud, which you heard a little bit this morning from Dave, and even DevOps was mentioned a few times. So before I get started, how many, and I can't see any of you, but how many of you are using cloud services in your environments? I don't see too many hands, but I bet there are more that you probably are using, but you might not know it. How many of you on the vendor side are offering cloud services to your customers? Probably more hands are going up then. So as we said in the introduction, for the last 7 years or so, I've been leading operation teams, deploying software as a service in a number of different businesses, from online gaming to security analytics to software licensing, and now to phishing defense. And if I think back to the late 1990s when I got my start in security, security has changed dramatically. In the late 90s, early 2000s, when I got involved in product security at Cisco, this is before Blaster, before NIMDA, before Code Red, in that period of denial when there was not the awareness of product security, network security, but this is long before we have Stuxnet and the weekly drumbeat of vulnerabilities and breaches and branded vulnerabilities like we had Spectre and Meltdown, like we had Heartbleed and all that before. When you're early in your career, you are very optimistic. You think you can solve a lot of problems. You think a lot of problems should be solved that probably you can't solve. But then that leads to a period of cynicism. And in the middle of my career, and this was also during the lost decade of ICS security, when folks like Dale were crying out in the wilderness, when there was a lot of blowback from the idea that ICS vulnerabilities should be publicly disclosed, even by an agency such as ICS CERT. That made an impact. And about mid-career, I started to think, well, maybe breaking things, maybe finding vulnerabilities as an outsider, isn't the best way to go about solving the problem. So you heard a little bit about DevOps this morning, and I won't go into. So basically, in this talk, there's an assumption here that DevOps, if you're delivering software to customers, if you're delivering solutions, that is the key way to deliver faster, better, higher quality. And DevOps is, I will probably disagree with Dave in his first slide. I think that is entering an era of maturity. It's been since 2009 when there was the seminal presentation by folks from Netflix and Etsy, 10 deploys a day. I mean, we're 7 to 8 years into this. Mature organizations are using this to achieve the levels of quality and reliability that the older models, where there was the strict separation between dev and ops, where there was much more of that kind of rigorous change control that Dan Geer mentioned, the results are in. So I'm not going to really get into that. But the key kind of proposition I'll make in this talk is that doing DevOps, and I'll talk about what that means to me based on my experience, is a necessary precondition to fully realize this dream of producing secure products and services. So I don't know if there's any members of IDG here, but if you just Google DevOps digital transformation, you'll see hundreds of hits. And I just pulled a few of them from the last few months as I was putting together this presentation. And although a lot of this is your typical analysts' hype that may seem superficial at times, if you dig into the details and you look at some of these case studies, like here, this article mentioned Intuit. And some of you that are at Mandiant and FireEye know that Intuit was a key partner in our threat analytics services. So I've seen behind the scenes that these DevOps and DevOpsSec practices really can work to achieve the desired objectives. Also, CSO. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of the term cargo cult, or anybody know what a cargo cult is? Following World War II in Papua New Guinea, the Aboriginals there outside of Port Moresby, they saw the planes coming during World War II, the transport planes, whether those were C-46s, C-54s, C-47s, whatever, bringing all this material from Australia, from wherever, and it would just show up magically on the runways. And it literally was magic. And they thought, okay, how can we get this magic? How can we get these riches? So what they did is they constructed lifelike replicas from the material that they had at their disposal, sticks, grass, mud. They built replica-like aircraft that you see in this picture. There's even one that I've seen that was a very realistic Japanese Zero. They built runways, they built control towers, they put lights up to simulate the landing approaches, waiting for the riches to come. And you will see this same, but they never did, obviously, because it wasn't real. In the field of technology, we see the same thing. With agile development, this where you think if you go through the ceremonies without changing the way you operate, how you think, that you're going to get the same results that you see someone else getting. And I think there's, I don't want to make fun of this article too much, but this idea that we are all going to be SREs, site reliability engineers, and that's going to be the silver bullet to solve all of our cybersecurity problems. It's hard to take that seriously, particularly if you've been in the trenches trying to do this. But the point is there are a lot of organizations that are embracing these new development and design and product development methodologies. And even Gene Kim is all in. And he was one of the early adopters and founders or of advocates of this approach, coming from an IT operations background where you can improve security, availability, quality. So, brief introduction is over. Three main things I want to talk about today. First of all, I want to talk how and why I left the world of ICS security, and along this dream of working in the cloud and why. Second, I'll provide a little bit of the kind of conceptual foundation based on some texts that I think you probably haven't read before, but they provide some of the kind of fundamental tenets of how to do cybersecurity in this era of rapid change, digital transformation, or whatever you want to call it, software eating the world. And then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about what are some of the successful practices that I've done with my teams over the last 6 or 7 years, trying to integrate security into this thing called DevOps. So 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I was interested in a lot of different things. And I was talking to Chris Sistrunk earlier about fuzzing ICCP and T-Packet and COTP and these low-level details when I was a security consultant and researcher. Since then, I've moved over to the dark side. Now I'm in management. So I worry about a lot more different things. I worry about people working together, alignment, are business units aligned, and how are those incentives that get people to do things to make the right decisions? Because as Ralph said earlier in his excellent talk, it isn't about scaring people, it isn't about raising awareness. you have to get people to do it themselves. And it has to be done through a combination of carrots and sticks, pain and pleasure. That's how organizations work. That's how developers work. That's how people work. And that is the path to achieving security. So 2007 was also an important year because that's when EC2 was announced. And I was living up in Chicago at the time, and I remember when I got this invitation to join this cool thing called Elastic Compute Cloud. And back then, it was a little more difficult. You had to generate keys. You had to download these Java SDKs to be able to spin up these dynamic instances of servers. And sure, I'd used virtualization before, and we used that for a lot of projects at Digital Bond when I was there, and in subsequent organizations. But I was convinced at this time that there was something radical and game-changing about this use of compute, the ability to dynamically program and provision infrastructure. And I was like, oh, I want to do this. But it took a few years. At the same time, if I look back where I was 10 years ago, and you'll notice that, I don't know if you saw it on the first slide, it said reflections of a former security professional. I really don't consider myself a security professional anymore. We can talk a little bit about that at the end. But I was definitely one of them. I was in that mindset that Ralph said where they don't get it. Business units don't get it. Product managers don't get it. Developers don't get it. Why aren't they doing X, Y, Z? It's so obvious. Why won't they implement security testing? Why won't they implement secure, by design? All of this. Why aren't the necessary investments made? And it took some maturity, and it took some maturing, and it took making some mistakes and understanding the consequences of that approach and how it doesn't end up solving the problem to move beyond that point. And this book here called Phoenix Project it's sort of a ripoff of the goal, but it's put in a modern sense. Instead of a plant manager taking over a failing production line and having to learn about the theory of constraints, it's about an IT operations manager that his boss quits or is fired, and he has to deal with these systems that are failing. He has a CISO who ends up having a nervous breakdown, which is kind of humorous in the book. But he has to deal with all of the politics of these large IT organizations, the silos, the developers that won't work together or with operations teams. So this was kind of one of the turning points when I read this, and I said, okay, the path that I'm on isn't really working. So since I left Digital Bond, and I did one more tour in ICS and smart grid security when I was at SAIC. And actually, the last time I spoke in a Digital Bond venue was Jerry Gallagher and I were talking about the work that we did for the Naval District of Washington and Quantico, where we built out and we, working with Weston Systems, who was the prime on the contract, integrating security into the rollout of this smart metering, solution, meter data management solution that we, in the late 2000s. And this was kind of a tipping point for me where I started moving away from this idea that, hey, maybe building things is a little more fun than breaking things. And delivering value to the business is, a better way than trying to always find problems and fight with people to fix things. Because most of the times, they didn't fix them. They just discarded your advice. So I did that, and that was a really kind of formative experience of being part of a very large 1 to 2 year project, huge Gantt chart, typical waterfall model, where you're dealing with physical infrastructure, deploying wireless access points, enclosures, commercial meters, of a very long project that was often delayed. And then the big shock for me was, I got tired of commuting in the DC Beltway, and I got a hit call from a recruiter like, you want to go work at a game company? It was 10 minutes away. Like, okay, how hard could that be, working in online gaming? I found out it was pretty damn hard. And experienced the crunch time and a huge cultural shift from button-down beltway bandits to gamers that watch Netflix all day while they're coding and do God knows what else on their computers and have a lot of demands for the infrastructure team that I led. And that, now we did some really cool stuff. That was the first time in 2012 when we launched a site in production system in AWS. 2011, 2012, AWS and the public cloud was much less robust than it is now. So I did that for a couple of years and made a hell of a lot of mistakes. And then I joined Mandiant and had the privilege to build out a security SaaS. And this is where I really started to get the idea of a properly staffed operations team with the right focus that is involved early on in the design of services, the data structures, microservices, the whole architecture that you can build and run. And also, if you have an operations team that is 50 to 60% security folks, that you could, and this was all outside the traditional IT organization. This was all directly in the business unit. So I saw how fast we could launch this service, go through the alpha and the beta, using all of the tooling and the principles, that I had started developing at my previous step. Recently, I joined FishMe, but for the last 3 years, I was at Gemalto, where I ran the software licensing and managed services business. And this has kind of been the final step of how I began to see security and operations as of the ability to change the business and to see how, with our customers, that software really is kind of changing and eating the world. Now, I'm just getting to what the definition of DevOps and DevOpsSec is. And it's sort of like this parable of the blind man and the elephant. If you talk to different people, you get different answers. But the kind of canonical answer of like the five attributes of what DevOps is culture, automation, lean, measurement, and sharing. And each of these has something to do with security as well. So really building that culture of security is not the blocker, security is not the Department of No, security is not to be feared, and establishing that solid communication between teams is one of the fundamental concepts that's required for security to be truly integrated. Also, automation. You saw the talk last there where we talked about playbooks. Everything is moving towards automation, everything as code, from infrastructure to application to systems and now to security. If you're a security vendor and you're not making APIs exposed so that your tools can be integrated, you're going to struggle in this new world of DevOps. Lean, Ralph talked about that already. Always thinking about reduced friction, delivering that minimal viable product, getting fast feedback, listening to your customers. And this is true even if you're in an internal team developing security. And it's not just about delivering customer-facing services. Measurement, metrics, ensuring that application security metrics, all of this providing that visibility to understand where are the bottlenecks, where do you need to take action, and all of the foundations for getting proper alerting, monitoring, logging into a stack, can be used as the foundation to move forward with security. This is also a really critical, these three concepts are critical to understanding what DevOps is. First of all, that the goal of security is to ensure that as this value is delivered from the business, whatever this product is, whatever this solution is, that security does not slow that down. Because one of the key lessons in a quote that I remember from the Phoenix Project is, a system that never makes it to customers, a product that is never launched, who cares if it's insecure? Because it never goes to market. So this focus on how value moves from development, design, to the customers via the operations team and ensuring that that moves as fast as possible while being as safe as possible. And it's this is obviously a difficult challenge, is kind of the first principle of DevOps here. The second is, and one of the things that I've seen with my operations teams over the years, sometimes ops teams try to protect developers. Sometimes they try to protect the product. You'll see when systems fail, folks might write cron jobs to restart. They might try to prevent that pain from being felt by development teams. This idea of feedback loops and pain driving change in products is essential to security. Microsoft would not have launched on the Secure Computing Initiative in the mid-2000s if there was not that pain there. It has to hurt. And now you have to be responsible as a security professional, especially with critical infrastructure. You don't want to deal with amputation, but stubbing their toes so that they learn a lesson. Burning your fingers is the way that you teach the business how to make the right changes from a security standpoint. And then the last piece here is how do you deliver value? How do organizations change? And it's a matter of short, small iterations that allow feedback to directly come from the customers. And this is where you see, organizations moving from 9 to 12 months releases to 2 to 3 months, or some organizations that are shipping code every day. So I won't get into this a lot because I know David talked a lot about it this morning, but we are in this era of rapid technology change. Even if you just look in the period of cloud computing, we have 3 main generations of infrastructure that are out there that are often being used simultaneously by developers. And he's right, developers have won. If you look at the tooling and the technology out there, it is no longer being marketed, being pitched towards IT staff. IT has lost. It is all being targeted towards developers and designers, not ops people. And that was a wake-up call when I started to see that with technologies such as Docker. Everything is about putting the power, putting the tools in the hands of developers. So these are three books. Maybe some of you have read the first one. Patrick Lencioni, management author, leadership author, also wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. But if I look at how you're going to build out DevOps, it's first you have to have the right culture, the right leadership. You have to understand how to implement agile delivery. And then this last book, which is a couple of McKinsey guys wrote, it really kind of describes this paradigm shift that's happened in cybersecurity over the last 5 years. So in the last 5 or 6 years, I've been working in these sorts of organizations where within a business unit that is responsible for delivering software, you work with sales organizations, you work with product management, and then there's the delivery team. And these are the principles that you have to implement in order to get all of these teams to line up. So this is a quadrant. I like quadrants. From the beyond cybersecurity, where I think it maps what Dale showed this morning, where we move from security not being important to it being a control function. And don't get me wrong, control mentality does allow you, and compliance does allow you to have as a starting point to add security into it towards where we need to go from truly integrating security throughout the organization. Now, this is the game plan that James Kaplan articulates in that book. Now, this may seem obvious, but if you talk to many security professionals, if they're assessing a system, how often do they know really how that system works? Do they really understand the business value? Or are they treating this like a generic system that you have to follow the checkbox answer of implementing technology A through Z without really understanding how it works, how it aligns with the business? So every DevOps presentation has to have a success kid meme, so I just threw this in here. But this is, to me, what I've seen is really hard. how do you get the right teams? How do you choose to build the right thing at the right time? And this is about lean. And then, are you solving the right problems? So if you look at those organizations that I showed on my, what I've been doing for the last 6 or 7 years, I've been in 15,000 person organizations down to a few hundred. But across those sorts of size of organizations, I've seen a variety of kind of anti-patterns where there are silos, where there's a lack of ownership, not enough transparency, hiding, not opening up, lack of clarity on the problems that you're solving, and very slow-moving teams. And so these are the sorts of principles that, when I take over a team, that I've been kind of keeping together and improving over the last 7, 8 years to help drive these right mindsets. So if you look at what do I think a DevSecOps organization looks like, this is how my current team is structured right now. I have a team of about 25 or so, and supporting multiple products. And I have a level of security architects and compliance that focus on the controls that are spread across multiple products. And then I use embedded security engineers within the service operations teams, within the DevOps teams. And this allows those security engineers to work side by side, not only with the operations teams that are deploying the automation, that are doing the monitoring, provisioning the infrastructure, but also with the AppSec teams. So there's this overlap of security personnel with operations personnel, with developers, so that you're properly implementing security into the development lifecycle. So that from the beginning, when the user stories are written, when the code is checked in, my team runs the source code repositories, the continuous integration systems. It gives us and the security engineers complete visibility into what is shipping, what is being deployed. We work closely with QA teams. We put together this pipeline. And everything now, and if you look at some of the presentations on DevOpsSec from Shannon Leitz, who's one of the core champions of this movement. She works at Intuit, and some of you at Mandiant and Fire, I know her name well. It's all about building this secure pipeline so that security is implemented from start, when the developer does local check-in, all the way to when it runs in production. So these are the places where security can and should be integrated. You can add static analysis into your source code repositories. You have visibility on open source dependencies, so you can do analysis of what are the libraries that you're using, because most of the software shipped today, you're using third-party libraries, things like Ruby and Node.js make extensive use of third-party components. If you have those CI tools built, they allow you to integrate that. So as soon as developers check in code, your tests are run, your static analysis, and it gives reports, and it gives that fast feedback. So it's no longer waiting till the end of that release so that security starts early. And then with systems like Docker or your Java artifacts, you're moving away from the idea that you're scanning live systems, because with these deployments, such as red-green deployments, immutable infrastructure, you're no longer upgrading in place. You're changing instances, pointing over to the load balancers. So it's much more about protecting the earlier part of the development pipeline than the later part in what's running. So you integrate these into the developer tools, into the build systems. And then when you do infrastructure provisioning, whether you're using things like Docker Swarm, Kubernetes, Puppet, Chef, Ansible, Terraform, all of this infrastructure as code, it gives you the complete transparency and the ability to see how the security policies are defined, how you manage users. And then with your centralized monitoring tools, where centralized logging, alerting, health check and metrics and things like that, that allows you to fully instrument and visualize and add on security checks and build on that for a solid foundation. So lastly, these are some of the areas where if you've implemented automation, if you have complete monitoring, and all of these examples are from within an AWS environment, you can fully implement security much easier. I remember when Shell Shocked came out. We had thousands of EC2 instances, and there were 2 or 3 versions of the Ubuntu patch that came out. And we patched 2,000 to 3,000 systems over a single week. And if we did not have all that centralized configuration management, there would have been no way to implement that. So bottom line is, I would say, take a look. There's a lot of stuff out there on DevOps. It's not just something that the startups are doing. It's becoming a mature solution, and to me, it's a prerequisite for really implementing security. Thanks.